Today, I sit down with Heather Driscoll, a certified coach and life alignment expert, part cheerleader, part radical accountability coach, and part wise intuitive guide. She is passionate about empowering people to discover what matters most to them and live in powerful alignment with it. You're going to really want to stick around with us as we dive into how she woke up to and honed her intuitive gifts, how she guides clients by tapping into their guides and hers, and how you can heal into your own life and awaken your own gifts coming forward. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman. I am with Heather Driscoll today, sister of the amazing Tracy Ellert, whom I know through my own sister, Carrie. Tracy reached out to me a year ago saying, interview my amazing intuitive sister. And some time went by as I got my stuff together in terms of having a podcast. And here we are. But as I met Heather last week for the very first time, we agreed that this is divine timing to share her gifts with the world. So welcome, Heather. It's so wonderful to have you today.
Thank you. It is so awesome to be here. And it is divine
Yes,
timing.
it is
It,
divine timing. Yes.
it
Yes.
is. I
And
remember
you,
my sister telling me last year, did Maureen contact you? And I was like, no, but you know what? That's okay. And about 3 weeks ago, I was doing my meditation and I heard it's time to start doing podcasts. And I was like, I started writing. I'm like, because I do my automatic writing, and I heard, like, it's time for you. And I was like, do I start one or do I? And it was like, nope, you're going to be guest. You're going to be a guest. It's going to be coming.
oh my
So
gosh.
I'm asked to do
Yes.
a couple of podcasts now, and it's starting. So it's like, it's divine timing for sure.
Oh, it's so beautiful. You did, yeah, last week when we met, you hadn't shared that. So that's just wonderful.
Yes.
I think that because a lot of our conversation today, we're going to span, the coaching worlds to the intuitive worlds to, the threads of your life, but I think that the place to start, Heather, and I do with a lot of my guests who come in with like these really strong intuitive abilities, which we all have, I believe, and we can speak to that too, but when did you first know that you were dialed in a way that felt unique for you?
Well, I definitely came in with like a ability to see the deceased. But I was brought up in a very Christian household, and it was evil to say anything like this. So basically, I spent a lot of my childhood when I would be woken up out of, a sound sleep with someone standing over my
Oh.
bed. I was so terrified when I was little. I didn't know what it was. So it wasn't a matter, I could see them more than I could hear any
Mm,
messages. It was not like I wasn't going to stay around for a message. It was just too scary. So I spent a lot of time in my childhood, asking my parents to leave the hall light on. I didn't want to be in the dark. I would go into their bedroom a lot. I was very, very scared of it. And so I kind of like pushed it out versus, with the Christianity, the church, and then not really wanting to see what they had to say because I was so afraid,
wow.
until
Yeah.
my early 20s, in which I started being woken up again in the middle of the night, and people were standing over me in my bed. I could feel them around me, and it was kind of reactivating again. And that, I would say, is really the start of me trying to have to, understand what was
Hmm.
happening with me, and kind of reconcile, like, am I evil? Is this evil? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? What do I have? And what do I want to do with it? If I do want to do anything with it. And that's
Mm.
kind of how I got started. And
Yeah. So fascinating. I'm thinking about your childhood, and do you have any recollection of whether when you first began to see the people who had passed on, was fear your first response, or do you remember a time before that when you did trust, but then kind of the religion or the culture, like you learned quickly that it was to be feared? I'm wondering if you have like any sort of memory of a like discernment there.
this is funny. And I've done a lot of past life regressions. So, but I
Mhm.
actually can remember my birth, and in a state of knowing, like, the situation might not have been like really prepared for me, and knowing kind of what I was going into and being like okay with that. And I think like as I've done regressions and really have that memory, like I can see now the fear, yes, was I believe taught by the church for
Okay.
me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my intuitive knowing was always, I have always had this knowing that I'm safe, I'm protected, I'm
Ah.
guided. And no matter
Mm-hmm.
which situation I've been in my life, like it literally has been this energy behind me of like, no, you're protected, you're
Yeah.
safe, this is where you're supposed to be, or whatever. So yeah, deep down inside, I did know that I was
Yeah.
safe and that this
Wow.
wasn't bad. But yeah, it's amazing the beliefs that we start to learn and create throughout our lives. So like
Yeah.
mom, dad, teacher, preacher,
Yeah.
and what's good and what's
Absolutely.
evil and what's bad and what's not. And then, getting to the point in your life where you kind of have to sift through that and say, is this really what I believe? Like, do I really actually believe this? Or
Mm.
do I not believe this? And then this was just something that was taught to me because that's what my parents believed.
Oh,
So
wow.
I say
Mm-hmm.
I hit that point when I was in my, mid 30s where I was questioning everything that I had been taught and raised with. And that was a like upside down journey of like, wait a
Yes.
second.
I hear you, and you described perfectly that. Even I think you had said in the mid 20s, when these visions and not just visions, but this
Yeah,
reality started to come back to you,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
that the two sides that you had, because I think a lot of people can relate to that of like, wait a minute, this is, even if you had already started stepping away from what you learned about religion and around your religion and these kind of things, even if you had already begun to step away, we just can't realize how ingrained these belief systems are. So that real, like, sort of division, like I was thinking the word war, but that's not right. It's almost like a division
Yeah,
or
it is.
separation from truth to what you had learned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Hmm.
had been, taught like, the power doesn't reside in myself. Like I have to give that power over to a pastor or, a God that sits up in heaven that is judging me and waiting for me to swear. And then I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
Like, it was like it's like, oh my gosh, this like bubble that I
Hmm.
was in of like, I'm such a bad person. Like I was born a sinner. And
Hmm.
it didn't started to not feel right for sure.
Ah, yeah. I'm thinking too, because, okay, so we're embarking, like we're starting this interview and you're sharing, okay, these are these intuitive gifts that were coming through early in my life. And I often think as Mystical Sisterhood, the podcast goes along, I realize that part of, it wasn't my original intention, was that this through line of divinity, right? And that, we work on ourselves, then we have the divine relationships to one another, but we have a very clear line to the divinity that surrounds us within a universal energy and how we
Yep.
think of this. But I just want to start there because that's sort of something I'm seeing occurring in real time. And that's just such a cool thing about anytime we create something, it can start to breathe and have a life of its own, and we don't even know what's occurring with it, but if we're open and we trust. But that's an aside. I was going to
Yeah.
go back to, because you've already named, like, almost like, okay, these decades of your life, in a sense, like you said, like my 20s, my 30s.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
like on your, and it's all, you're multidimensional, but I'm thinking of like, okay, this is your spiritual experience sort of that you've been describing in a way. What about,
Yeah.
like, if we just said, I don't know how you describe it, but what about like the human experience that you kind of started out your adult life in? Is there anything that you want to share around that and what was co-occurring during this time?
Yeah, the human experience was more like I was trying to hide. I spent a lot of time hiding who I really was. And I have an extreme, intense ability to feel people's emotions and take that and know exactly like what's wrong with them, where their root problem is. So I struggled in the human experience being around people and feeling a lot of incongruency and like what they're
Oh, wow.
saying and then what they're actually feeling. And that was very confusing for me. So I was like, they're lying. They're not they're not
Yeah.
being real, like I spent
Hmm.
a lot of time in my humanness in that aspect of where I was. And also too, you know, this 20 years ago, being able to have a conversation like this 20 years ago was not accepted. I
Mm-mm.
mean, even when I met my husband, it was like he knew that I would like kick him off the side of the bed because I would wake up because someone was standing over me and he would be like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "There's somebody there." But that was like the extent. It wasn't like literally like I can really have a conversation with people that have passed. And so it wasn't really widely talked about, and it felt like there was a big part of me, like I always had this deep longing to work with people and help people. And I had that my whole existence, even when I was little. Like I would have teachers confide in me, and
Mm.
and I was like, why is like this 50-year-old teacher confiding in this fourth grader? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the deal? But I attracted people like that my whole life. Even in the grocery store line, I'll be like, by the time I get through the checkout, the person behind me has told me their whole life.
Yeah.
And it's just that ability to like hold the space for people
Oh.
and be able to people to be able to come in and feel that energy that they're heard. And that didn't start with me in my human existence until my mid 30s, where I was like, okay, something's going on here and I really need to look at that and start digging deeper into my spiritual beliefs and into what I actually believe in. When what is it that I want to do? How do I want to help people? And what does that look like for me?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's been a journey.
Well, it's a beautiful share. I just taking a pause here to just digest the telling of that journey for you and how beautiful. I've never heard it described that way, but I'm thinking of people in my life who I
Mm.
know are incredibly empathic and tune into emotions as well. And I have seen it in one of my children where he will like his BS kind of uh, a probe, or the way he can pick up on someone
Yeah,
telling a non-truth is it's fabulous.
yeah, yeah.
and and I
BS.
really, yeah, yes, and I think that he just did it to me a couple weeks ago, and he asked me a question, and I said I paused and thought like, got to come out with the truth here, and I said the truth, and he said that's what I thought, and I said, if I would have lied, would you have known? And he said yes. But I love that you share that, and also sharing that for the listener who has had that experience. Or even when you say that to me, I think, gosh, how much of that do I also experience? And I keep myself like in a corner, like, no, 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 you're not. Yeah, sure, you're empathic, but you know what I mean? We don't understand or allow ourselves to kind of question like ourselves of, oh gosh, I can really relate to that too. And maybe the reason I experience things the way I do is because I'm hyper empathic or just so tuned in. Or so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of that too for a lot of people is, when we do feel that, like we've been trained not to listen to our bodies. And our bodies are our vehicle in this life. There are vehicles, and in that they are giving us signals all the time. About it's like, when your oil light comes on in your car, you have the
Mhm.
choice to pay attention to that. If
Mhm.
you don't pay attention to it, your motor's going to blow. and
So
and
good.
it's no
Yeah.
different with the human body. And a lot of the work that I'm doing right now with my clients, and teaching classes that I'm going to be teaching this spring and stuff, is all about like the connection, the emotional connection with the body. And
Mhm.
how a lot of times, like you're saying, maybe I have that ability, maybe I don't. Everyone has that ability to be able to tune in to the frequency that's going on and say, that's a truth for me, or that's not the actual truth. The difference is, do I want to accept what I'm getting? Do I want to
Mhm.
accept the information that's landing in my body? Because if I do accept it, whether it's a truth or not, then my life might change.
Yes.
And if my
Mhm.
life changes, well, then what does that look like for me? And if people aren't ready or they're not comfortable to experience that change, then they will choose to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Yes.
all have the ability. We all are getting information constantly. We are energetic beings. That's who we are. We're energetic beings first and foremost. And our language is energy. We all speak energy. We've all been, there isn't one person that's not going to listen to this podcast or anything else that's not going to say you haven't entered a room where two people have been fighting and they're
Mm-hmm.
not saying a word. And what is the saying? Boy, you can cut the tension in here with a knife.
Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
energy. People are emitting energy and you're bumping into
Yes.
other people's energy all day long.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we are choosing to either read the energy and then make a choice about that energy, or we're choosing to get the information and push it aside and deny it.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the only difference. So we
Well,
all have that ability.
okay. So let's talk about owning the
Yeah.
energy we show up with, because
Oh,
I
good.
had two instances in the last month, like 6 weeks, 2 months, where I was called out on my energy by someone in my family saying, Mom, what you just said slash did was passive aggressive. And I
Mhm.
got triggered real fast. And then I was able to, like, I walked away like I did when I was a kid, but I came back. But I was still hands on my hips, like, gosh dang it, that wasn't passive aggressive. So I told my therapist slash coach, and she said,
Yeah.
were you holding a mixed energy, Maureen? And I was like, and I looked at myself, Heather, and I hadn't seen it, but I thought like, oh, I was being so cheery, saying like, oh, come do this with me. But my daughter picked up on the energy. She called
Mhm.
me out on it. I didn't like it, but I was able to look at it. And then I realized when this other person, I was vulnerable enough to turn around and share it with somebody. And they said, you were holding mixed energy. And I
Mhm.
was, because it was like kind of directed towards my partner. And there were years and years and years of what I perceived as, or like experienced as hurts underneath it. And if I
Sure.
can just say, and it was around like this, we have a Jewish and Catholic backgrounds in our family. So
Yeah.
we were both carrying the energy, I think. But anyway, how can we own our energy? Or I think it's a great conversation about, like, if you pick up on mixed energy, you're probably accurate. So let's
Yeah.
also own our own mixed energy.
Yeah, I think what is a hard thing, and like a lot of my clients that I work with, they don't like to hear this, but we are mirrors. We live in what's called the law of mirroring, which people know as the law of attraction. But what ends up happening a lot of times with that, like what you're bringing to the table, the energy, I mean, there are aspects of the self that we have denied and disowned. They're little protector parts from whatever traumas we've dealt with as a child, and those protector parts start to run the show. And a lot of times people are very unconscious of the fact that a protector part is actually running the show when they're triggered with something. It's the reason why, like, you could be with a boss and all of a sudden the boss is acting like a 4-year-old child, and you're like, what just happened? That's because whatever was said or whatever energy is being brought triggered him back to the age of 4 when a very specific situation happened that was very similar. And a lot of people are not conscious of these triggers and not conscious of the parts of themselves that they've, suppressed and
Yeah.
denied and disowned.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's the one reason why people, you can meet someone and you can be like, oh my gosh, they're so angry. Like, they don't even need to yell or anything, but they just are
Yeah.
angry. And the person can be like, I'm not angry. What are you talking about? I'm not angry at all. But
Right.
there's energy. They're bringing an energy to it. And guess what? They're probably showing up with a lot of people that are angry around them.
Hmm.
And they're probably like, no, it's you that's angry. It's not me that's angry. And this is how relationships get in trouble, is because there is an inability to look at the self and it's one of the things, it's the hardest thing to do. And it's a practice that I have. And when I say practice, it's literally a practice that when I get irritated with something, or I'm upset with someone, or things aren't going my way, and I start to feel like, my partner's not doing what I want, or my children aren't doing what I want, or something's not happening the right way, and it starts to become consistent, I'm like, where really am I emotionally? What am I bringing to the
Yeah.
table? What's my energy? What am I
Mm-hmm.
looking at here? And all of the time, I'm not even going to say 90% of the time, all of the time, it's within me, and I'm
Yes.
projecting it out.
Yep.
And honestly, that's the only thing that we are responsible for, is ourselves.
Yes.
We
Yes.
think that we're responsible for everybody else, but we're not.
Mm, I know, and that brings up to me sort of, I don't know if you call it a victim consciousness. I know some people can be triggered by that because there are circumstances where people really were a victim to things, but just the idea, like how do you explain that?
I think people that have a victim consciousness, this is the problem, is that they were victims. You know,
Mhm.
they were victimized at one point in their life. They were victimized. They were a victim because that consciousness exists from somewhere. Okay.
Okay.
But
Mhm.
what ends up happening is that there's all these emotions that start to come up with that. And when there's an inability to process the emotion and look at the emotion and heal from the original wound, and we deny and suppress and disown those parts
Yeah.
of the self,
Mhm.
then we don't actually process and deal with what we have to deal with. And so when we don't do that, we tend to stay in the victim consciousness.
Mhm.
And so, in essence, that victim consciousness is born from being victimized, but it's an inability to process through the victimization and work through the wound to get to the other side and
Yeah.
say, yeah, you know what? I was a victim at one point, but I actually have power within myself. And I am the one in control of my universe, my reality. No one
Mhm.
else is in charge of me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where the problem lies, in the victim consciousness.
Yes. And I think that, a lot of terminology and like even the language we're using today, it's populating more and more the channels we're looking at. So I think it's always important to bring in that as consciousness rises, that we're also, it feels like entering a new space of let's be able to say these things and share these things, holding ourselves, even as listener, with such self compassion and non judgment as we hear them. Because if we're open to learning, there's going to be the parts that are so vulnerable in us that are just like, I don't like what they're saying. I can't relate to that. Or maybe I do see myself in it. But like, I know in my process that just coming over and over and over again with as much self compassion and understanding and sort of hand to my heart as I can
Mm.
allows me to transform what was existing inside, to releasing emotions. And yeah. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. And I think that what ends up happening is it's hard for, when, especially with a big trauma, like any type of like abuse or anything like that, where it's like, you were victimized for a good portion of your life, and then you deny and disown so much of yourself, that little child that you have to create a protector part for safety, that you operate in that as an
Mm-hmm.
adult. And I feel like, self compassion at that point, when people are in that without the awareness of what's going on, inner child work is one of the things, one of the
Mm-hmm.
tools that needs to be done. Because if you can't have compassion for, and this is like the problem on the planet now, I mean, if you can't have compassion for yourself and for that little child, and make peace with what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and find that unconditional love within yourself,
Yeah.
and by processing what happened and processing the emotions, then it's so hard to, like the mirroring, the law of mirroring, it's so
Yes,
hard to
it
externally look
is.
out and see the little child within another human. and
Mm-hmm.
and this is what the problem is like, when you come from the place of the observer, which is what we're talking about, to be able to have that compassion and look at another human and be like, ah, oh, they must have been so victimized at what, hurting people hurt people. This is why they're behaving this way, so that you can come from a place of real deep understanding. You have to do that to yourself first,
Yes.
because if
Yes.
you're not working with yourself in that capacity and understanding the self first, it is pretty much impossible to have that kind of compassion and empathy for another human. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why it's so important that the work starts with the self. Like, if we want to
Yes.
change the world and we want to change what's happening, it literally starts with the self. And that
Yes.
is like, okay, where am I at in my life right now? What don't I like about it?
I love
And
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and what I don't like about it, am I willing to explore how I might have got
Yeah.
here? What are the beliefs that I've had in my head for so long that I've believed, that
Mm-hmm.
got me to the point where I am now? And if I could do that, if I could create like illness, if I could create a life that I don't like, that I can't believe that I'm living in, well, then I probably can create a life that I absolutely love. And I
Yeah.
probably can create health,
Yes. Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
literally like starting to look at the self and what are my beliefs and what, where did they form? How did they start? How do I get deeper into who I really am?
Yeah. I love the inner child work too. Maybe for a couple, one or two takeaways, because I know in my coaching, when I do inner child work, it'll be bringing someone into the experience that they had as a child. And it's so interesting how quickly someone can drop down into that heart space and describe what she was wearing or he was wearing and what were they were feeling, and meeting them with such compassion and what did they want to hear, and it becomes an experience. There's also, I think, of like putting that picture of your younger self on your phone, your screensaver, or a picture of her, let's say, next to your computer, where you can give that re-experience and that love. But what kind of practices do you like to share with your clients?
Well, the inner child work that I do is really kind of deep. And when I do work with them, we try to re experience the trauma that they went through in
Mm-hmm.
the way that they would have wanted to see it work out, and give them a space where they have safety that they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have when they
Yeah.
were a child. And we basically re envision what they would have wanted, and take them to a space where they are safe. Because what
Mm-hmm.
happens when you experience a trauma, and listen, a trauma can be anything from,
Uh-huh.
you were in a car accident when you were young, to witnessing someone being killed, like
Mm-hmm.
it trauma happens in all different forms. And I believe like every one of us have experienced a trauma in our life, and we hold things. When that happens, the brain takes a snapshot of it
Mm-hmm.
and literally holds that snapshot. And you remember the smell, you remember what you were wearing, you remember exactly like the time on the wall, you
Yeah.
remember everything, colors, details, everything. So, and that's a safety mechanism in the brain, so that you never have to experience that again. And that's where the protector part, that little inner child, disappears, and the
Mm-hmm.
protector part steps in to save you.
Yeah.
And this is what ends up happening, is that protector part is the one that starts to run the show. And we
Yeah.
never really realize that protector part is running the show, even when we're an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get
Mm-hmm.
triggered, we go
Yeah.
back immediately to that, and we don't feel that it's safe. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people too, like inner child work. I have done so much inner child work, and it is not easy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not easy to go back and re-experience whatever you went through, because it was so painful at the time. Who wants to re-experience it? But the problem is, because your brain takes that snapshot, you really feel like you're going back there,
Yeah.
and you're not.
Well, right. And I
You
think
know what I
that,
mean?
yeah. And I think that question you just asked, like, who wants to go back there? And the people who end up wanting to go back there are the people who cannot stand what's occurring in their life in the current moment. Like you and I think we talked about that phrase, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when we kind of see, we all know the patterns we're stuck in, whether it's one or two or three. or
Mm-hmm.
more. We there I think like in our lives there's those for each of us. There's our soul's journey and the things that we're here to kind of work out and work on. And my thing might not be your thing or
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
listeners, area, but I do think there's that aspect of something in your life is going awry and
Mm-hmm.
push comes to shove. And that's what I want to offer to people too, is like even through the myriad of guests that I've had and the coaching I do or whatever it is, that there are places you can go these days that are becoming very accessible, and maybe the language that Heather's using is the language you need to hear. Maybe Heather's vibration and her energy is right on wavelength with yours, and I just love that offering and the potential and possibility that comes with it for healing on the planet right now.
Yeah. And I just going to add to that, like for the fear that people have to go back into that space, that it's emotions that people are terrified of. It's
Mm,
that's
mhm.
what is the biggest resistance to doing the work on the self or fixing whatever they've got going on in their life. But if people looked at these emotions as like little bubbles that are coming from the bottom of the ocean, and each one of those little bubbles has information for you. That's it. It's just carrying information. And as it comes to the surface, if you take a step back and just look at what information it's carrying for you, you'll be able to start to process it a little bit better than instead of resisting the emotion.
Yeah.
Because what you resist persists, right?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
more
Yeah.
we push down the emotions and don't process them, the bigger it gets. And if you don't process the emotions, it's got to come out. It's energy, right? Emotions are
Right.
energy in
Yeah.
motion, and it'll come out one way or another. And a lot of people end up getting physically ill
Mhm.
from not processing emotions, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm seeing a lot in my coaching right now. A lot of physical ailments that are unprocessed emotions.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
big thing.
It is, and just how there's so many. I have to ask you a little question about, I know you're a parent, so I know with
Yeah.
my path, well, interestingly, one of the most popular episodes of the last year was consciously parenting your adult children, with
Mm.
my friend and colleague Nani Langenstein. And how have you seen with your children, because you might be like me in the knowledge and experiences and integration you've kind of put together through learning about the depth of our emotions and our deep needs and all the things, like have you seen your parenting change, and have you seen your relationship with your children also change and evolve?
Oh, oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I was a single mom. I was pregnant at 17 with my first child. And I mean, I was a different parent first and
Yeah.
foremost with her, and then a different parent with my next two that came along. But also, when I was a young parent, it was like anxiety, very anxiety driven, and fight, flight, or freeze. Or if they didn't do what I wanted them to do, it was just like, you need to do what I tell you to do. I'm your parent, like because I said so, just do it. Where now it's like, they're actually an incredible soul
Yeah.
here. I see them so different, where I'm like
So cool.
so intrigued by them and their paths that they've chosen, and the conversations that we have now are incredible. Like my husband and I were just talking because we had just gone away this past weekend, and each one of my kids called me like 3 to 5 times in one day, and my husband's
Yeah.
like they call you so much. And I'm like, you know what, I'd rather have my kids call me 5 times a day than not have a
Mhm.
relationship with my children.
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and it really is like, I'm real with them. I'm real with them about my emotions now. I'm real with them about how I'm feeling. They're real with me.
Yeah.
And it really is a relationship that has a lot of reciprocity. And
Beautiful.
it's
Mhm.
the growth is exponential from me as a parent to when I started to now. But
Yes.
that again is a lot of work that I've had to do. And trust me, I've had these moments, especially with my first child, where I'm like, I'm so sorry. I
Mhm.
had no idea what I was doing. I was
Yeah.
not a very kind parent. I'm so sorry.
But have you also come to understand that the experience that she is having on the earthly plane is so specific to her, because I've got some of the same, like, I think for a long time, regrets is the word that comes to mind about what kind of occurred early on in my parenting. Maybe, I mean, Heather, quite honestly, during my pregnancies, and how, and
Sure.
so that kind of way that women can really shame ourselves and kind of just be hard on ourselves. But I think through really taking a different lens and learning more deeply about a conscious or mindful or whatever you want to call that style of parenting, that and doing the inner work, I'm way easier on myself. But I also understand it's my children's journeys, and it's none of it's by accident. And that concept that they chose us to learn
Mm-hmm.
specifically what they, and that's a mind blower.
Yeah. It is,
Hmm.
especially when you look at your own parents, you're like, really? Are you sure
Yeah,
that I chose?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm super grateful I chose my parents. Like the existence I came into, like this time, I know I've lived a lot of lives before to get to the point where I'm at in this life, because,
yeah,
I've got no complaints about my life. My life is extremely incredible on all regard, with relationships in my life to
yeah.
everything that I've done. And it's a pretty incredible concept. To I know a lot of people are like, I don't think so, you
Yeah,
know.
but when you share that, I think it's the mirror. So you've
Hmm.
really nurtured your inner worlds and brought so many new ways of being with yourself, and how beautiful that you see the reflection on the outside, and like everything, really being in alignment, and it's truly possible. I want to go back, because I think that the reason you and I like hit it off just in a hot second was because you also like to blend in, I believe, this idea that we do create our own reality through our thoughts, and it's an area of our life we can be very responsible for. But do you feel, before we kind of jump into how our thoughts affect our reality, do you believe that it's the emotional healing that needs to be done first? Not necessarily, Maureen. I feel like they can be concurrent. Like, how do you feel about that?
So for me, your thoughts are electric and the emotions are magnetic. Okay. And
Okay.
they're
Mhm.
connected. All right.
Mhm.
So what happens is the brain, people think, is like the main brain of the human, what I believe it's the heart. And so what
Mhm.
happens is that the heart is what creates the emotion that's
Okay.
attached to the thoughts. And so I feel that what happens is we think about something, and that sends a thought out, that thought sends a signal out down the line. I tell my clients, like, think of it like telephone poles down the road, and your thoughts send out a signal, and as that signal goes down, there is always an emotion that's attached to that thought.
Yeah.
And emotions are magnetic, and it's the emotions that is what's drawing back to you your reality. And
Yeah.
that's why a lot of times when we have limiting beliefs and we have unprocessed emotions
Yeah.
subconsciously that are sitting in there, even if you don't have an awareness, you'll have, like, a lot of my clients, like, I don't know why do I keep getting the same jerk guy? Like, why does he keep showing, like, why is it the same guy? Well, what are the beliefs that you believe about yourself and your worthiness and who you
Mhm.
feel that you should be attracting to you? And that really is like that mirroring, but the law of mirroring really is the law of attraction, and what's actually attracting is the emotion.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so that's why it's even more important to really be conscious of what you are feeling and
Mhm.
thinking. Is it congruent? And if it's not, I always say, like, your life, what you got going on in your life outside, that's what's happening on
Mm.
the inside.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
it's not matching what you want,
Yeah.
then that's the work that needs to be done. That's
Yeah.
what you need to look at. If you constantly
Mm.
are attracting the same guy who is not showing up for you, he's emotionally unavailable, he's, whatever the problem is, then you want to look within and be like, okay, what are the beliefs that I believe about myself?
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
what, you know? And
Mhm.
so that's what I really feel like when we attract, it's the emotion that is attracting. So, do
Mhm.
you have to do the emotional work first? I would. Because you're always going to have the thoughts. The thoughts
Mhm.
are there since the moment you're born into this
Mhm.
existence. you're learning from mom, dad, preacher, teacher, and they're putting thoughts in your head about what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. And you're going, okay, right? Like literally, like by the time you're 7, you've got all of your beliefs and they're not even yours.
Wow. Yes.
You get into, you get into, 20s and 30s, and it's becomes an unlearning. It becomes like,
Absolutely.
do
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I necessarily believe that. And, why am I in this place? What have I done? So yeah, I would definitely be working on, especially if you're in a point in your life that you don't like the situation that you're in.
Yeah.
And it's the call to go within and look at
Mhm.
yourself and heal what needs to be healed. And then
Mhm.
once you do that emotionally, you're going to have different feelings. You're going to
Yeah.
have different emotions about where you're at. And so
Beautiful.
then you can be in that space, like, it's like telling somebody to say an affirmation like, I am beautiful, right? But their entire life they've been told by their parents that they're ugly, they're worth
Mhm.
nothing.
Mhm.
They should have never been born. And they have that belief, and they all those thoughts that
Yeah.
they've kept thinking over and over about how unworthy they are and how ugly they are, and the emotions that are attracting back to them that. And then I go tell them, just go say I'm beautiful. Really? That's not
Yeah.
going to work. You've got
Yeah.
to be able to do the inner work to actually believe that you are beautiful, and that's the work that needs to be done.
Great answer. And I think that when I look back when I had a major health diagnosis 6 years ago, that I think I may have had it before, but I had Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. It's got this beautiful cover and it's got a lot of affirmations.
For sure.
But and so when I went through it, I would do the affirmations like, my cells are in perfect order, I'm in perfect health, sort of things like that. But my something inside me said this is not enough. And when I
Hmm.
went through that journey, and that's where I became this like really, I think, like prolific seeker. And I think a lot of people listening, and I know yourself from what you're saying, you're a prolific seeker. And it's so enlightening to be that. And you pull in what you need at certain times, and then maybe later you discard them, or like, I'm coming back to the work now, but I needed to do
Hmm.
the emotional healing in between. So I resonate with that. I want to jump into how you have tapped into your intuitive guides and what that looks like for you, and how that maybe at one time it wasn't incorporated into your coaching, but now it is. What does that look like?
Yeah, that was a crisis. That's usually how things start for people, right? Like, we don't need to, just for people's sake, like, we don't need to wait for a crisis to make the
Right.
change. But a lot of
Agreed.
people get the crisis, whether it's the health scare, whether it's the, relationship scare, whatever. But I had in our business, we had a big issue happen. And it had scared me because it was like pivotal for what was happening, was like, was our business going to make it through this? And it started me on this path of like, where I had gone to a place from my childhood up, like praying to a God, like, please, God, please let this happen. Please let this be okay. Please, like pleading from a place of pleading, to like, this doesn't feel like it's working anymore for me, to going on the path of, Esther Hicks, Abraham Hicks, and Dr. Wayne Dyer, and Louise Hay, and Hay House, and downloading Hay House Radio, and finding all these teachers, to me actually working with some of the best teachers for my intuitive abilities, like Sonia Choquette, and like really starting to work on myself, and actually like who I am, my abilities that I have, how can I contribute? And I knew I always wanted to help people. So how does that show? Like, how do I want to help people? What do I want to do? And it was like, coaching for me was that I know I can take people from here to where they want to be up here. And I know, like, because I could feel the vibrational frequency of people, because that's what ends up happening, where, depression is a very low frequency. I could take them from here and then open up things for them and start to give them the tools that they need on a daily basis to start to do the work to tap into the parts that they've suppressed. And that for me was how I kind of got on this path of like, this is my jam. and
Beautiful.
starting to utilize my intuition and adding that into my coaching. And probably almost 20 years now, I've been meditating on a daily basis. And that in itself took my intuition to like full blown
Mm-hmm.
level where,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't just seeing dead people over my bed, like they can communicate with me
Yeah.
and I can get
Love that.
messages and I can pass
Mm-hmm.
the messages, which was a whole nother thing where it's like I do have the very big ability for mediumship, and when it's necessary I use it with my clients, but it's not my main tool. My main
Mm,
tool is my ability to read energy
I love it.
and
Mm-hmm.
be able to use that with my clients, and that's just an added part
Yeah.
of who I am that I can actually bring to the table.
And that's a great kind of vantage point of how are you here to support and how are you here to share your gifts. And I thank you for saying the piece about meditation, because earlier when we were talking about even being aware of our triggers, it really is a slowing down. I
Mhm.
talk slower than I used to. And if you can create I think that I'm going to say, like, when meditation first came on the scene, like probably 20 years ago, let's say, right? Like when we started seeing Deepak Chopra or just like different thought leaders talk about meditation in a way that hadn't been introduced before. Maybe it was in the 90s even, I don't know, but it felt far away. It felt inaccessible. It felt something that needed to have specific parameters, and you either did it or you didn't, or you were either good at it or you weren't. And
Yeah.
it's kind of different. And we can do you think like the portal into it or the entry point can be a lot easier than we think it is?
Oh, it is, especially now on the planet. I
Mhm.
mean, the planet
Mhm.
is, Earth herself is actually in a massive change, as you can see from the weather that we've got going on. Yes, there's global warming, but there's also Mother Earth is feeling what's happening on the Earth, and she is shifting herself to accommodate what's happening on the Earth. And
Mhm.
I absolutely believe like now people are able to tune in and tap into themselves in ways that 20 years ago it wasn't accessible. And now it's completely accessible and easy to be able to, even if you're just focusing on the breath, just focusing on the breath for 5 minutes.
I think that we're going to be seeing just a lot of more rapid changes. I had asked in this private Facebook page I have for Mystical Sisterhood, which is there for anyone to join. It's in the show notes, but I'll just have prompts. And yesterday I asked the question is about this age of Aquarius and the expansion that people are feeling or seeing or what that means to them. And so you've been working with clients for a while. Are you seeing some changes, some more readiness or allowance
A lot.
happening? A lot.
A lot.
Hmm.
Yep. Where we're headed as a consciousness on the planet, you cannot take your baggage with you where we're going.
Love it.
And this is what I've been trying to work with my clients, where it's like, and your baggage is your denied, suppressed, disowned part of yourself that you don't want to look at. And you're seeing that more rapidly on the planet now, where a lot of people are getting sick, earlier cancer diagnosis, like all these things where it's like, what is going on? Like, I can't
Hmm.
believe so and so just died. I can't believe this
Hmm.
just, it's literally like you have the option to opt out,
Yeah.
or you do the work and you continue the ride, because you can't continue the ride in this age of Aquarius, going where we're going as a consciousness on the
Yeah.
planet. You can't
Hmm.
continue without doing the work. We can't be united and one
Hmm.
when we've all got so much baggage that we are unwilling to look at it as ourselves, because then we'll never look at the other person as the self.
So beautiful. It's so yes, I love it. And thank you for adding your voice to that question. I had a recently gone to an appointment and ended something was well, it wasn't even bothering me. It was detected by my dentist. And they said, go see the oral surgeon and have a biopsy. And so I did, and I thought, oh, well, nothing will come of it. And they told me I had an autoimmune condition. And I walked out of a very mild one, and I walked out of the office like, well, I don't feel it. So I'm just going to go about my life. And then this past Saturday, I felt it. I felt it. And I would say that that was probably like 4 to 6 weeks ago that I was with the oral surgeon. And I like threw it in the trash can. I'm like, it's mild, so I don't have to do anything about it. And yet it came back to talk to me. And
Yeah.
that's the way I'm viewing it, is Maureen, it's calling you to rise higher. It's calling you to be very interested in what it has to say to you. And for a moment I was like, well, this sucks. I don't like it, because it was something else like that was calling me back into my body. And
Mhm.
I didn't like it, but only for a hot second. And then I said, what is it here for me? And I felt like it was here for some refinement around nutritional kind of clearing. And and yes, there's more emotional. But it took me a minute. Even though I've been through health stuff, even though I know the body speaks to me, I didn't listen when it first cropped up.
And usually too, like what I see with my clients, and also have the ability, like when I work with my clients, like medical issues and stuff too, like I can see blockages in the body. And like I have really come to notice that specific areas in the body that get congested, or cancers, or autoimmunes, or things like, if it's affecting your jaw, like you're up in your throat chakra here. And when you're in your throat chakra, literally it's, the back of the neck, like right down the top of the shoulders, your thyroid, your throat, your jaw. And that's all about speaking your truth. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all about saying what needs to be said. And I see that a lot with my clients, where it's like, let's listen to what the body is saying. Like, look at the
Yeah.
body and look at the part of the body that it's
Mm-hmm.
affecting.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people with heart conditions, where it's
Yeah.
like, is your heart closed off? Were you so wounded and so hurt as a child that you basically said, like, I'll never feel like this again, I'm going to close my heart off? These are the things that for everyone listening, when you start to have physical ailments, and even if it's something as stupid as stubbing your toe,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
literally like wake up, just even, or bumping your head. Like, that I remember one point in my life, like as I was starting this journey, like in one day I bumped my head 3 times, and it was like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the deal?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it's like, okay, I have to wake up and pay
Yes.
attention to what's in front of me. And are you paying attention, Heather?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do I have your attention? And
Mm-hmm.
it's literally that part, when the body, this is what people don't understand, is the body is your indicator
Yeah.
in this life.
Mm-hmm.
It's our vehicle, and it's no different than a car. If you
Mm.
got a flat tire, are you going to keep driving on the car? If you do, you're going to ruin the rim. And if you
Yeah.
ruin the rim, you're going to have to buy a rim and a tire, and you could cause a fire. Like, what are you going to do? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's
Mm-hmm.
it's literally like, that's how important it is to pay attention to your body, and how connected your body is to emotional
Yes.
well-being. Like,
Yes.
where my body's speaking to me, what do I need to look at?
Oh, thank you for all of that. All this gold and this goodness. It's so much information, but just heartfelt information that I know is going to just support so many. Heather, where can listeners find you? And also, you mentioned upcoming workshops. I don't know if they're information or what, but if someone can get
They
on your
are,
email list or, you know.
yep, they're being
Mhm.
formed. You can go to my website, which is lifealignmentexpert.com. And on my website, it has, courses and, things that are coming up. But you can join my community. I have an online community that
Mm,
I'm working with right now, actually. So this spring, I've got some courses I'm going to be teaching along the lines of what we're just talking about, with
beautiful.
the
Mhm.
emotional component and the physical illness of the
Good.
body, because I really, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of that. And it's so important for people to understand the connection there. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm doing. But you can go to my website,
Mm,
lifealignmentexpert.com. You can put in your name and address. You can contact me through there, and I'll get in touch with you right away.
beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so fun and informative. I want to thank the listeners too. Thanks for being with us. And I hope that you're having many takeaways from today's interview, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.